What generally well-liked celebrity or athlete has had a dark past that many of us may not know about? Paul Walker dated a 16-year-old when he was 33. Steven Tyler was 27 years old and started a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old girl. He eventually convinced the parents to make him her guardian so he could continue to have sex while he took her on the road with him. Got her pregnant, forced her to have an abortion, then got her addicted to drugs and returned her to her parents all ducked up 3 years later. It has been pointed out that her age was probably closer to 16 than 14. In his book he refers to her as Diane Hall, 14 years old. Jack Nicholson found out at age 37 that the woman he thought was his sister was really his mother. She was 18 years old when she gave birth to him. The woman he thought was his other sister was really his aunt. Because his mother was so young when she gave birth, her parents chose to raise Jack as their own son, and thus everyone thought his mother was really his sister, and he didn't find this out from family. Time magazine was researching the actor and found this out, and then revealed it to him. Pretty sure a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's infamous pranks would qualify as workplace harassment or just flat out felonies. Like that time he handcuffed two actors together who had just met for the first time and then pretended to not have the key for a whole day. Or that time he made a bet with a stagehand that the guy couldn't make it through the night handcuffed to a piece of scenery in the studio. He locked the cuffs and gave the guy a drink to help calm his nerves. The drink was spiked with the most powerful laxatives available on the market, and when they returned the next day, the guy was crying in a massive puddle of his own it. And the time he locked Tippi Hedren in a room with several live birds that all attacked her and left her bedridden for a week. Oh, and he sent her 6-year-old daughter a lifelike wax replica of her mother in a coffin. Phil Lewis aka Mr. Mosby killed a woman in a car accident while he was drunk. NBA legend Karl Malone had a child with a 13-year-old when he was a sophomore in college. He denies paternity and has never publicly commented on it despite DNA confirmation. The son, Demetris Bell, was an NFL player for 5 years. Said he only met his father on one occasion after he graduated high school, when Malone told him it was too late for a father-son relationship and he would have to make his way on his own. A girl that Ashton Kutcher was dating was murdered by an alleged serial killer. He stabbed her in the neck so many times that her spinal cord was the only thing keeping her head attached to her body. Kutcher went to see her that night after she wasn't picking up the phone, and when he peeked through the window he saw a pool of what he thought was red wine. He figured she was mad at him for an argument they had earlier and got drunk out of frustration. But the pool he saw was her blood. Edit. Spine to spinal cord. Not anything he did, but Sir Patrick Stewart has talked about growing up in an abusive household. His father was verbally and physically abusive to his mother. She would call the police on him, and they'd dismiss it and tell her she must have provoked him somehow. Stewart later learned that his father was diagnosed with what is now called PTSD, which is why he supports charities dedicated to treating PTSD as well as charities aimed at helping people get out of abusive relationships. Jerry Seinfeld openly dated a 17-year-old high school student when he was 38 years old. Took her on the red carpet and everything. Just very strange in my opinion. I couldn't imagine dating a high schooler when I was 20-21, let alone 38. Henry Rollins of Black Flag was nearly killed by armed robbers back in 1991. The robbers forced him to enter his home at gunpoint in search of money, but he managed to escape through the back door and alert the police. His roommate roadie Joe Cole, who was with him at the time, wasn't so lucky. Joe was shot in the face point blank and died at the scene. If my memory serves me right, Henry still owns a container of blood-soaked dirt from where Joe's head fell after he died. Also, Prince had a child that was born with FIFA syndrome. The baby died around a week later. Woody Harrelson's father, Charles Harrelson, was an American organized crime figure and hitman who was convicted of assassinating federal judge John H. Wood Jr. This was the first assassination of a federal judge in the 20th century. More than during an interview in November 1988, Woody revealed that he visited his father regularly in federal prison, though he still harbored mixed feelings for him, saying, "My father is one of the most articulate, well-read, charming people I've ever known. Still, I'm just now gauging whether he merits my loyalty or friendship. I look at him as someone who could be a friend more than someone who was a father. Charles also killed several others throughout the 60s and 70s, was accused of being involved in the JFK assassination, and attempted to escape prison in 1995 but failed. I'm not sure how well known this is, but since I haven't seen anyone mention it yet, Mark Ruffalo aka the Hulk. Apparently he found out he had a brain tumor right around the time when his wife was about to give birth to their first child. Then his brother was murdered. Either that or OD'd, I'm not sure. He was also in a bad financial situation for a long time, until he got the Marvel role. Richard Pryor was born to a prostitute who abandoned him at age 10, raised in a brothel by his grandmother who was the madam, raped at 6 by a neighbor, molested by a priest, expelled from school at 14. Keanu Reeves' girlfriend gave birth to their stillborn child in 1999. They then broke up due to grief, and in 2001 she died from a car accident. Charlize Theron. Apparently her dad assaulted her mom and she shot and killed him in self-defense right in front of her. Jackie Chan used to be a porn star for his first movie role. Joaquin Phoenix was raised in a cult called the Children of God. Gandhi was extremely racist against black people. He contributed to what the apartheid system would become, and used slurs that are considered a felony on India now. He wanted Indians to be a part of the Indo-European White Brotherhood. Oh yeah. He was a pervert as well. For those who say I'm wrong or want a source, I got my source here. Edit. Something nukes and Civ 5. Mother Teresa denied painkillers to the patients in her care, saying their suffering brought them closer to God. When her cancer was diagnosed, she was flown to hospital and took all the palliative care and painkillers on offer. Obviously felt she was close enough already. Owen Wilson tried to kill himself. Marv Albert, who has been one of the most prominent NBA play-by-play commentators for years, forced a woman to give him oral sex. He was convicted as a result of bite marks on her body, as well as semen at the crime scene. A different woman also accused him of sexual assault, claiming she showed up to his hotel room to help him send a fax, only to find him wearing only silk panties and a garter belt. He pleaded guilty to assault and battery and was fired from NBC, but reinstated after 20 months, and still commentates on games today. John Lennon is viewed as a man of peace, beat the out of his wife, before Yoko, and cheated on her regularly. Imagine all the people. Michael Fassbender assaulted his girlfriend Sue Norman Andrews on multiple occasions. He dragged her from a car. He threw her over a chair and broke her nose. When Andrews took him to court and filed a restraining order, Inglourious Basterds had just come out and his star was beginning to rise, so it seems like the studios protected him. But yeah, he's a real piece of it. There are many sources on this. It's a quick Google, but here's just one. Samuel L. Jackson has a pretty intense part of his history that not many people may know about. This is from his wiki. More than in 1969, Jackson and several other students held members of the Morehouse College Board of Trustees hostage on the campus, demanding reform in the school's curriculum and governance. He was charged with and eventually convicted of unlawful confinement, a second-degree felony. Also, Bill Wyman, longtime bass player for the Rolling Stones, yes, one of the Quiet Guys, dated a 13-year-old in 1984, when he was 47. The guy who wrote the Rotten Rafe books got the idea to be a children's author while serving time for drug trafficking. Danny Heatley, former Ottawa Senators player, wrecked his car and killed his teammate. Faced up to 20 years in prison and $5,000 US in fines if convicted. He pleaded guilty to 4 of 6 charges, got 3 years probation, and had to deliver 150 speeches about the dangers of speeding and cannot drive except for work, medical purposes, going to the grocery store, or for attending his speeches. He continued to play in the NHL. Tim Allen, mainly known from Tool Time, Sugar Smuggler. Does this count? Judith Barsi played Ducky in the Land Before Time movie and The Girl in All Dogs Go to Heaven. By all accounts she was an absolute sweetheart. Her father not so much, jealous of her fame. The money got abusive, threatening, etc. The story ends with him breaking a restraining order, killing Judith and her mother, then himself. I think he tried to burn the house down too, I guess a lot of NFL fans might know, and it isn't that dark, but Aaron Rodgers has zero communication with his family, and nobody really knows the entire story. The theory is that they were money hungry and or Rodgers was very protective of his wealth and Olivia Munn when they were dating, and he eventually cut off all communication with them. Mark Wahlberg. I think he's come a long way from his life when he was a brutal racist, but I think I'd stop short of a pardon. Michael Jordan. He had a terrible gambling problem, and there was even speculation that his 2-year retirement was actually a suspension. There was also speculation that his flu game wasn't a flu game but rather a hangover game. The rumor was that he was up all night gambling and drinking. Wilhelm Homburg Norbert Group, villain of Ghostbusters II. His father was a Nazi, mother walked out on him. Father forced his name change, raped his stepmother. His half-sister turned out to be his daughter. Drug smuggler, would spit at boxing fans. Was so awful on and off screen in Ghostbusters II they dubbed over him with Max von Sydow. He made a fit, cussed out Ghostbusters II crew and didn't get much work after. Would mooch off money constantly for drugs and spirits. Guy made his sister wait a month to hear the news of his death to cancer, solely because she did the same for his father's death. Matthew Broderick killed a mother and her daughter when he crossed into the wrong lane and collided head-on with a Volvo. He was fined $175. To be fair, there were apparently no drinking or drugs involved. He was tested in the hospital he woke up in, and is said to have had a small stroke or the crash caused him to have a concussion and no memory of the accident. Julia Roberts bullied her sister so much that her sister killed herself. The sister actually blamed her and the family for pushing her to do it. Rick Moranis, Ghostbusters, Spaceballs, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, was at the height of his career when his wife developed cancer and passed away. He took less and less roles before completely retiring to care for and parent his young children. Such a good guy. Tennis star Jennifer Capriati basically had her career derailed for 2 years early on due to substance abuse issues. She was also arrested for shoplifting during this period. She came back from that and eventually won 3 Grand Slam titles in the early 2000s. Many years later than most people in the mid-90s would have predicted when she was the rising superstar on the women's tour. However, she has had some more problems since retiring in 2004, including a drug overdose and treatment in 2010 and stalking and battery charges brought by an ex-boyfriend 3 years after that. Vince Neil drunk drove and killed Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle in the 80s. He did 30 days in jail and bailed himself out for $2.5 million. I wrote a $2.5 million check for vehicular manslaughter when Razzle died. I should have gone to prison. I definitely deserved to go to prison. But I did 30 days in jail and got laid and drank beer. Because that's the power of cash. That's f***ed up. Tiffany Haddi's stepfather attempted to murder her mother and possibly Tiffany and her siblings as well by tampering with the brakes of her car. Tiffany and siblings thankfully opted out of the trip, but the mother was left with severe brain damage that triggered schizophrenia. Haddish and her siblings were put into foster care at age 12 and weren't reunited until put into their grandparents' care when she was 15. 2 years later, Tiffany was sexually assaulted by a police cadet. In the early years of her comedy career, she was homeless living in her car. David Bowie slept with 13-year-olds. For some reason this was always overlooked. Chris Benoit, WWE, had so many head injuries he went insane and killed his wife and son before killing himself. SpongeBob and Patrick once stole a balloon. Richard Simmons was 268 pounds when he was around 19-20 and took art classes in Florence, Italy. He became anorexic and almost died. I'm sure most of us know he was overweight when he was a teenager, but I read his book and at one point, he pretty much only drank water and wouldn't eat food, which caused his hair to fall out and his skin got all grey and saggy. He also made himself throw up. So yeah, his late teen years were not pretty. He was actually an extra in Fellini's Satyricon in 1969. as an overweight lute player and was a dancing meatball in these commercials in Italy. I wish I could see those. Quickly searches for Mr. Rogers' name. Breathes deep sigh of relief. Matthew Broderick killed a mother and daughter in a car wreck. Didn't Bruce Caitlyn Jenner kill someone by running them over? O.J. Simpson once went in trial for a double homicide. Drew Barrymore got into drugs and drinking when she was really young, but growing up seeing her in The Wedding Singer and 50 First Dates, she seemed like the bubbliest person. Louis Armstrong smoked a lot of pot and reportedly even had President Nixon carry bags with them through security for him. That way it wouldn't be checked. He said he couldn't carry them because he was an old man. Not really dark like the other stories here, but pretty interesting. Not hidden, but fairly unknown at this point just because she isn't a common actress anymore. Allison Mack, who played Chloe in Smallville, was a sex trafficking recruiter leader for Six Ring NXIVM, which was portrayed as a self-help style group. Once she recruited people, she would blackmail them to keep them in Ike. Turns out she was second in command of the entire cult, right behind leader Keith Rainier. She was caught in April this year but was released on a $5 million bond, and I'm not sure what has come of her conviction yet. If you didn't think that was bad enough, she started the idea of branding all of the six slaves when they got recruited too. Edit. Keanu Reeves has had pretty much everyone he ever loved die. Kevin Spacey used to be an abusive asshole. He still is, but he used to also. Andre Agassi was on top of the tennis world when he got addicted to methamphetamines, and his career spiraled out of control, sinking him down to relative unknown, until he resurrected himself and turned it back around. Dave Navarro's, guitarist for Jane's Addiction and briefly with RHCP, mom and her friend were murdered by her psychotic ex-boyfriend when he was a teenager. He was once handcuffed to a toilet and her murder led to his drug and alcohol addiction in the 80s and 90s. Steve Jobs. The Lisa was named after his out-of-wedlock daughter he refused to take ownership of. Due to a loophole in California state law, he wouldn't put a license plate on his car for 6 months, calling it recently purchases, and then after 6 months would buy a new one also he could park wherever he wanted, including handicapped spots. He blatantly stole from Xerox. Microsoft had to bail out his company. His very treatable cancer was ignored as he thought his fruitarian diet would help cure it. Then there's his belief that he didn't need to shower or wear deodorant. Such an awful person. Will Smith was arrested and charged with a slew of criminal charges in 1989. Assault, aggravated assault and criminal conspiracy, after he sat to the side and watched his bodyguard beat a record promoter so badly that he broke his eye socket and caused him to go blind.